Welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast. I hope you all had a phenomenal Monday. Hope you enjoyed me and Gary's New Year's resolution episode yesterday. Go check that out. I actually just recently put it on all other platforms other than YouTube. I forgot to hit the send button on that. But guys, hope you're all having a phenomenal Tuesday, January 4th. I am, of course, your host who does the most, Ethan Smith, here at the Locked On Pirates podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. Excuse me, every single day. And you can listen to this podcast, as mentioned, on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, thank you for 100 subscribers on the YouTube channel yesterday. I wanted it before New Year's, but we got it a few days later. And also, if you're on YouTube, make sure you follow the YouTube channel. Follow me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan and at Locked On Pirates. And on today's episode, we are starting our guest episodes for all of you that listen to the podcast. And today, we have Mr. Dylan Spaulding of The Flow Show. He's going to come on and we're going to talk about some prospects he's excited about, some prospects I'm excited about, how confident both of us are in Derek Shelton, and the dilemma at catcher is a big problem right now, and we're going to talk about that as well. But as you always know, when the music hits, it's time to get real, so let's have a fun episode, guys.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And, of course, everyone, welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast. I am, of course, your host, Ethan Smith. As you see, to my right, we have Mr. Dylan Spaulding of the Flow Show podcast, our first guest in this guest series that we were going to be doing all off season. As I've mentioned, all Dylan did was DM me and ask if he could be on. I said yes, and I will say yes to all of you as long as you come on the podcast and have some stuff to talk about. It's the middle of January in baseball, and there's not much to talk about right now, but Dylan said, hey, let's talk about some Pirates baseball. So how are you today, sir?
I'm doing good, man. I always love talking about the Pirates. I'll be honest, I'm actually really a Phillies fan, but I love the Pirates because I have a special place in my heart with them. So I'm excited to talk some Pirates baseball and get to talking it with you today.
Okay, well, we'll start with this question then. Who makes the playoffs first, the Phillies or the Pirates?
Ooh, I'm going to go Phillies right now. As much as I would love to see the Pirates make it, and I love some of their younger guys coming up through the system right now, I got to go Phillies, man. I think right now they're in a win-now situation. I think they're in a better situation right now, but I like where the Pirates are heading, and I like a lot of their young talent right now throughout the organization.
Oh, yeah, and before we started, you said you really wanted to talk about these prospects, and that's where a lot of this young talent is coming from. As mentioned on the episode yesterday, you're going to be seeing a lot of these guys come up, like O'Neal Cruz, Roansy Contreras, who we've already seen. You're going to see some newer faces like Travis Swaggarty, Caden Smith-Njigba, Jack Sawinski, Diego Castillo. There's a lot of different guys, and that's not even the only guys that you're going to see, but what prospects are you most excited to watch for in 2022?
Well, on a personal note, I'll just say I am very looking forward to seeing Travis Swaggarty and also hopefully Cal Mitchell. Obviously, being able to interview them and having some relations with them, being friends with them. I'm really looking forward to see what they can do. Travis Swaggarty has been killing it throughout the minor leagues. He had a really good season last year in Indianapolis and a nice season as well in Bradenton. Same thing with Cal Mitchell as well. He's got a high batting average. He's a guy who hits for contact. He's definitely been a good hitter at the plate, and he's also a great fielder as well. He's really just an all-around great player. Would love to see him get up to the major league level, and I'm excited to see. I don't know if he's still considered a prospect. In my opinion, I still consider him a prospect. As you mentioned, O'Neal Cruz, I think he's got so much talent. He can bring that power to that lineup that I think the Pirates really desperately need. Obviously, we saw them go get a guy like Yoshi Sasugo last year, who I think will actually have a really good season with the Pirates. He's kind of had that burden, if you will, off his chest with the Tampa Bay Rays. Can kind of restart fresh, be with the Pirates organization, and maybe bring some pop into the lineup. So I'm really excited to see O'Neal Cruz for a full season. Obviously, only played like 2 games last season at the end of the season, so kind of not too much time with the team. But I'm really excited for those 3 guys, hopefully to get their debut and get their major league career off and going this season.
Oh, yeah, and I always said this about last year, too, is the 2 funnest games to watch last year, arguably, were the first game with the Key Brian Hayes home run against the Chicago Cubs and the last game where you got to see O'Neal Cruz play as well. I really said that. I was like, it literally went from game 1 to game 162, and you get to see two different teams, two very different teams based on what we saw. And I mean, again, most of my intrigue with these prospects, and you've probably heard me say this before, does not come from this first wave. I like the players in this first wave, don't get me wrong. I'm going to like to see what they do, but one of the things that I'm very excited to see what this team does is give a lot of these guys an opportunity this year, figure out who you like and you don't, because 2023, you're really going to be looking at a lot of the guys that are in our top 5 in our prospect list potentially coming up, like a Quinn Priester, like a Nick Gonzalez, like a Carmen Majinski, like a Jared Jones. Jared Jones is another guy that could definitely get up there. Like a Brennan Malone. He's another guy that a lot of people I think have forgotten about. Leover Piguero, another phenomenal player. So that's the thing that I think most intrigues me about how Ben Cherington has built this system now, is he's not only built this system for one wave and is hoping that wave is good. And I can see you probably agree. It's more or less now that even on top of the draft they just had, that's your third wave of prospects. So you have wave 1, which I would consider the O'Neal Cruz wave. Wave 2, which could be the Quinn Priester, Piguero, Gonzalez wave, and then wave 3, which is the draft class that you just had, the Henry Davis, Anthony Solometo wave. And I mean, the Pirates, realistically, if they can continuously keep drafting well, and as we all know, another top 5 pick in this upcoming draft, this is how you build a winning baseball team, right? This is how you have to do it. You have to just keep pumping the prospect pool, especially when you don't have a ton of money to spend either.
Yeah, and I could completely agree with that. In my opinion, right now, I think the NL Central is up for the taking, in my opinion. I think really
100%.
there are a lot of teams right now, especially really the bottom half. Obviously, we know what the Brewers bring to the table. We know what the Cardinals are probably going to bring to the table, hopefully a little bit, maybe a turnaround for them heading into 2021. But, I mean, that bottom 3 with the Reds and the Cubs and the Pirates, it's kind of up for the taking right now. And I think this season, for Pirates fans, there's got to be a lot of promise because you have a lot of young talent. You're getting into where, okay, you see some of your promise upcoming with this organization and with this team. I think they can easily be a 3rd place, 4th place team, even possibly heading into this season. I could easily see that, and maybe almost being a surprise team for a lot of people. But in my opinion, I think if you're a Pirates fan, you kind of know this going in that they are going to get better, hopefully, in the next couple of years. And it really shows in the way they've been drafting. And that's one of the cool things about this Pirates team is the way they've been drafting has been so successful because they are, putting in the time and effort, and they've had good draft picks the last couple of years. So they've really done a good job in their scouting and being able to get those big name players early in those first rounds, and they've been able to capitalize on them. So I'm really excited to see these next couple of years where they can go up to, because I think there's a lot of promise, and I would say a very wide open NL Central.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, the other thing is that a lot of people forget to realize is the Reds are probably going to take a step back. They lost Castellanos. They've talked about already trading Luis Castillo. The Chicago Cubs took a noticeable step back and then made some interesting offseason moves that made absolutely no sense to me. And then, I mean, the Cardinals, I think, are going to probably win the division in 2022. I think they're going to actually put it together and really make things work. The Brewers are still no slouch, though. That pitching staff is absolutely ridiculous. I don't think they did anything this offseason to fix their offense, and that was their biggest problem. So, yeah, I would agree. And one thing I jokingly say on this podcast all the time is that the state of the Penguins and the Steelers, just how both of those teams are right now, the Pirates could very well be the best team in Pittsburgh in 2023. It's a very big possibility based on some things that could happen here in the future, but it depends on how those teams run and how those teams fix some things. But before we continue with today's episode with Dylan, I want to let you guys know about the best protein bars on the planet, and that is Built Bar. Built Bar, of course, is the best tasting protein bar on the market. Of course, it tastes like a candy bar, maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bar makes it easier to stick to your New Year's resolution because it tastes so good you'll want to eat it. And unlike other protein bars, they can be they're not chalky, they're not waxy, and they don't taste like a chemical spill. You want to eat healthy, but it just gets so boring. By like week 3, you might be thinking this isn't worth it, but where's the chocolate? Well, the chocolate, Dylan, is in Built Bars that are covered in 100% real chocolate. And most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of net sugar and net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. And there are so many flavors to choose from: coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, raspberry, cookies and cream, salted caramel, mint brownie, and many more. In fact, Built Bar is coming out with new limited time flavors all the time, so check out BuiltBar.com often to see what's new. Go to BuiltBar.com and use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off of your next order. Sometimes it's Locked On, sometimes it's Lock15. I'm sure one of them will work, but make sure you go invest in the best protein bars on the planet. Now, you brought up about the idea of the Pirates potentially being that third-place team, competitive team moving into next year, and of course a lot of that rides on the manager, on Derek Shelton. Some people, including myself last year, were very questioning on Derek Shelton last year just because of some things that he pulled in games. I mean, you saw pulling pitchers early because of the lack of arms. I understood that after the fact because I didn't really notice until like August. But some of his decisions were just very questionable decisions. But overall, I think he's done a fine job. So how confident are you in Derek Shelton?
I think here's my thing with it, and again, Derek, obviously a former Tampa Bay Rays, so he's kind of got that Rays mindset, as most Rays mindsets are coming out of that organization, because Kevin Cash, obviously, he's got that whole thing where, it's always about the analytics and all that. So I feel like Derek kind of has that little bit of that mindset heading into the Pittsburgh Pirates, and it's obviously due time. He's been around the league forever. He's been a bench coach. He's been around, the game for a while. So it was good to see him get this opportunity with the Pirates team, that it was at that point in a rebuilding mode. They're still kind of getting to hopefully where they want to be at this point. But in my opinion, I think it is still a little early to tell what Derek Shelton is going to be, because it's kind of like similar with Don Mattingly with kind of the Marlins. Don Mattingly's a fantastic manager, but the Marlins are always, a rebuilding. They're kind of in a, up and coming kind of way right now. So I kind of have that feeling with Derek Shelton. He's kind of in this kind of new age where the Pirates are trying to get to where they want to be. And I think he's trying to be a part of that charge and hopefully lead that charge. And I think he's got time to hopefully develop as a manager, because he's only been there for a year and a half. If you really think about it, that 60-game season wasn't very much and wasn't a full representation of what it would have been like for a manager. So realistically speaking, last year was like his really first season as a Pirates manager, in my opinion. And I think hopefully he'll get acclimated to that position. And I think he'll be able to figure out and, kind of make it his team and not, other people's team. I think he'll be able to figure things out. So I think give him some time, and I think we'll see a good manager from Derek Shelton.
Yeah, and that's what I think Bob Nutting and the management staff is going to do. Is I think they're going to give him some time. I mean, you have to, based on the state of the roster. Excuse me, the state of the roster that he got. Sorry about that. That came out of nowhere. But the state of the roster that he came into has already changed so much. I talked about this on the podcast yesterday with the moves that Ben Cherington has made. The longest tenure Pittsburgh Pirate on this team is Cole Tucker. I think people forget that. And I mean, the prospect pool he's going to end up acquiring here in the next couple of years, I think that's really where you're going to see a lot of his management style. I think that's where you're going to see a lot of his management come into actual play when he gets guys that can actually develop in his system, develop in how it works. And keeping Don Kelly also, I think, was one of the biggest things that the Pirates did this offseason. Of course, he was a candidate for the Mets GM or manager job, not GM job. If he got a GM management job, I'd be crazy. But keeping Don Kelly, I think, helps too, because he's another good voice to have in the clubhouse all the time. And that's what you want when you're a team rebuilding, is you don't want to have a crappy team on top of a crappy clubhouse, right? That was part of the reason they got rid of Todd Frazier. Todd Frazier, of course, I think half of Pirates land forgets that he was even on this team last year. But you want to keep the culture good. Because if you don't, then you're going to have players want to leave. You're going to have all this kind of other turmoil that's going to stop players from doing things. So I think that's one thing I really like about Derek Shelton is he always goes out of his way to let you know that somebody played a good baseball game. He did it a lot with Ben Gamel. He did it almost every game with Jacob Stallings. He did it with Brian Reynolds a ton. Always talked about Ke'Bryan Hayes and his defensive ability and all that stuff. And I like to see that because I don't want it to just be like, oh yeah, we won 8-6, great game by everybody. It's like, no, like specifically tell these kids, because they are, for the most part, some of them are still kids, tell them that they're doing a good job and let them know that you are seeing it. Because then what does that do? That puts in their head that, okay, if I keep doing this, he won't have to tell me I'm doing a good job anymore. He'll just know I will. And that's one of the biggest components of all this is how is he going to interact with all of these prospects? How are the prospects going to interact with him? And I think that's the biggest question moving forward.
I agree. And I think being a manager, especially in the position for the Pirates, where, as you mentioned, is a young team and, could use a lot of those guys could use the positive, influence. And I think having that positive backing as a manager is definitely huge. And it shows a loyalty not only to the organization as a whole, but also to the players that you have on your 26-man roster. So I think having somebody like Derek Shelton, who as you mentioned, is giving them that positive support. You see managers even nowadays who don't give any support. They just are like, it was a great win, we got the W, and we're going to go on to the next day. And they don't actually credit a lot of times the guys who actually contributed and made some good plays on the field or made a nice hit or whatever the case may be. So to have somebody and to have Derek Shelton be able to do that for the players and almost give them some motivation and such and give them some, kind of encouragement, I think that definitely helps and for them as well in their development as a player.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, again, what do you think a good timetable would be for, obviously barring anything extreme, like a good timetable to the point where we could say, okay, Derek Shelton is either a good manager or a bad manager. What do you think a realistic timetable for that is?
Ooh, you made this tough. I'll tell you that. Man, this is gonna be tough. I don't see him. Obviously, I don't think this is a hot seat year for Derek Shelton. I think you give him another 2, 3. I would say maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 years possibly. I think you got to give this team some time. There are some guys who have raw talent in this organization, and then you have guys who you probably are going to know who are going to be blue chip. You're going to get them right into the MLB, and they're going to make an impact right when they get into the MLB stage. I think you got to give Derek Shelton some time. I think the Pirates organization and the front office knows that. I think they know that this team still is building and it's constantly changing. You obviously see a lot of, veterans who come in, get an opportunity here to maybe help out some of the younger guys and develop them and help them out, as we saw last season with Todd Frazier coming into the organization and, kind of giving some, veteran insight, I feel like, to a lot of the younger guys and, brings kind of almost like a leadership type to the Pirates organization. So I think Derek Shelton has about a 3 or 4 year leash. I think you got to give him some time because there is still a lot of development and a lot of, a process, if you will, with this Pirates team. But I think that, again, the future is very promising. But I think for Derek Shelton, he's on a decent, leash right now because I think there is still a lot of time with that development for him, to get better as a manager. And I think everybody's involved with it. Again, it's an entire, I think, team process right now they're all going through to get to that future step, which hopefully will be the playoffs and maybe even a World Series appearance.
Oh, yeah, of course. And I'll leave it at that. I mean, I think that's a great place to leave that. I mean, Derek Shelton, again, he's a guy we'll be watching, a guy we'll be making sure everything's going well. And before we continue to our final segment, a word from our sponsors. All right, and we are back with Mr. Dylan Spaulding of the Flow Show. Sorry, I almost said of the Locked On Pirates podcast. He's going to steal my job, guys. Don't worry. See, look, I can't even point in the right direction. I'm pointing over here right now, so over here. I always do that. I try to point, and then I always point the wrong direction. But Dylan has made some great points today. I don't know why I have a lingering cough today. It's really interesting. But we're going to finish off today's podcast with the dilemma at catcher, and I didn't even pose the question on the bottom. We all know it's a problem. This team, after trading Jacob Stallings, had one catcher on the active roster and then sent down Michael Perez to then add Roberto Perez, who is now the only catcher on the roster. So what in the world are they doing, and what in the world do you think they should do to fix it?
Well, obviously, we know Jacob Stallings obviously got traded this offseason, came down to Florida, down here in my part of town here in Miami, Florida. So right now, obviously, as you mentioned, Roberto Perez is the only catcher on the roster. You do have a guy like Michael Perez who played with the Rays a little bit during, I believe, the 2019 and I believe the 2020 season as well. He's a guy who has some promise, has kind of been up and down right now throughout his career up to this point, but again, still has that prospect promise, if you will, with the Pittsburgh Pirates. He could be a guy, you could try to use maybe for a few years, just try to see where he goes and then make that decision on if he's a guy who could be a future player and a future catcher behind the dish. But I think right now where the Pirates are, obviously you're looking at Henry Davis right now, and that's your number one pick for obvious reasons. So, I mean, you're looking at him as the guy, hopefully that will be the catcher of the future for this organization, but he's kind of still getting started and, he's got some time to develop and some time to get to the major league level. So he's right now not your first option. I think if you're the Pirates, you go get a veteran type of player. I see some names on here. You got, guys like Wilson Ramos or a guy like, Austin Romine. You got guys on the free agency list right now for the Pittsburgh Pirates that they could end up grabbing and have a decent catcher that could bring some veteran presence. Because I always say to myself that the catcher position is one of the most important positions in baseball because they pretty much control the entire field. And with a young team like the Pittsburgh Pirates, where a lot of the positions are young, I think you have to go get kind of a leader, kind of a veteran guy who's been there, done that. And I think with some of the free agent names that are out there, like Jose Lobaton, Robinson Chirinos, Kurt Suzuki, there's again Austin Romine, a Wilson Ramos, some of those veteran guys. I think you could be able to go and grab one of those guys and maybe have a veteran behind the plate who can lead this team heading into the 2022 season.
Oh yeah, of course. And I mean, with the CBA right now, they can't really do anything, obviously. But I definitely think if the season starts on time and we do get spring training, I could 100% expect this team to go sign somebody before spring training or during spring training and tell Michael Perez, you have to beat this guy out to get on the team. Because right now, Michael Perez, realistically, yes, he's not on the roster, but by de facto, based off of how last year went and the year before, he's basically the backup, right? The thing that I'm preaching about so much heading into the spring training is the idea of competition. You have 9 middle infielders right now. You're going to be having a lot of competition. On top of that, you have 8 outfielders. We already know Brian Reynolds and Gamble are probably going to get 2 of those spots. That leaves 6 other guys fighting for 1 spot. But the catcher position right now is not like that. Pitchers are even like that right now. There's a lot of young arms that are going to be trying to get in that rotation. I'd say right now, firmly, there are 5 spots that are probably like definite spots that you'll see a player in. Third base, Key Brian Hayes. Catcher, Roberto Perez. Center field, Brian Reynolds. Left field, Ben Gamble. First base, Yoshi Tsutsugo. Those are definites. Of course, there's definites in the pitching staff too, but that's a lot. That's a lot to say. But outside of that, I mean, even Kevin Newman, he can't just win the starting shortstop job this year. He probably will, but he can't just go out there and say, I'm the starting shortstop. Rodolfo Castro. Oh, you're good. Rodolfo Castro can't just say, I'm the second baseman. Like, there's a lot of guys on this roster this year that are actually going to have to earn their spot, and I think Michael Perez, by bringing in another guy, is going to have to do that.
I completely agree, and shortstop, especially with Kevin Newman, is going to be such an interesting position, as it has been the last 2 years, because you think about it, that shortstop position in Pittsburgh is loaded with prospects and a lot of young talent. And O'Neal Cruz, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, O'Neal Cruz, wasn't he a shortstop at one point? Wasn't he listed as a shortstop at one point? Or maybe he could play shortstop. Okay, yeah, he still is a shortstop. So, yeah, I mean, just looking at that shortstop position, I mean, that is a loaded shortstop position right now for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And they're going to have some tough decisions to make. I mean, a guy like Cole Tucker is going to be a guy to be interesting to watch in spring training. And I think this spring training is going to be really fun for Pittsburgh Pirates fans because of these battles. It's almost like preseason with football, Like you see a lot of those positional battles and, guys on the second team or the third team trying to make it up to the first team and stuff. I think you're going to see a lot of that here with the Pittsburgh Pirates because of how deep and loaded they are with prospects and guys who are coming up the system. And they're going to be battling, a lot of those guys who you might have seen last season or have been kind of mainstays, if you will. I think, as you mentioned, there are a few spots. Obviously, Brian Hayes, I mean, that's easy. He's going to be the future of the franchise and maybe one of the anchoring pieces of the franchise. But, I mean, in my opinion, it's going to be a really interesting battle heading into spring, if there is a spring training. And I think that it could be a big factor as well is if there's no spring training, say if there's only a summer camp or however they end up doing it, how are they going to do these battles? Like, how is the battle going to shape out? Because I think that's really going to be a key piece into how a lot of these players, get to the major league level and what their time frame is for this season. Because I will think a lot of the guys who are right now on the roster will probably get some playing time this MLB season.
Oh, yeah, of course. And, of course, when we get to that point, we will be covering everything here on the Locked On Pirates podcast about that. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in today with Mr. Dylan Spaulding. And, Dylan, go ahead and tell the people what you do and where they can listen to you as well.
So I cover I do a podcast called The Flow Show Podcast, which I cover all baseball in Florida. And so I go from college to pro baseball. If you want to find me, you can find me on Spotify and iHeartRadio, pretty much anywhere you can find your podcast. And you could also follow me on Instagram as well, The Flow Show Pod. I post a lot on there. I have some interviews coming up as well. I actually just interviewed the Bradenton Marauders broadcaster, Spencer Smith, who actually I got the broadcast with this past season. So I got to be on a broadcast with them, and definitely check us out. We're always covering the, Low A Southeast League. We're covering a lot of the teams there, covering, a lot of collegiate baseball in the area. And then obviously the Rays and Marlins and, pretty much every team in baseball we also cover as well. So definitely check us out. And we would love to see all the Locked On Pirates fans hopefully maybe jump over for a podcast or two, because we definitely will greatly appreciate it. We love the fans. So.
Oh, yeah, of course. And you guys already know where to follow me. You can follow me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates on Twitter. You can listen to this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Odyssey, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcast. And thank you, of course, for using the hashtag #FirstListen as you make me your first listen on the Locked On Sports Network every single day. But I would be okay with it if you listen to Christopher Carter at the Steelers podcast today first. I know something happened last night that was very important and dear to our hearts, so I get it. But with that said, guys, thank you so much for an awesome episode. Thank you so much for tuning in today on Tuesday. And Dylan, thank you for coming on. And guys, I will see you on the flip side.